Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the July 22nd regular meeting of Council. I'd like to first recognize that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk tonight will be Ms. Sheila Gurry. We also have the following councillors who are attending electronically. Councillors Brown, there we are, and Councillor Armstrong. Tonight's regular meeting of Council is being held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding a matter that was considered by Council today, please sign up on the sheet located in the table by the double doors to my left. Please note that the Council Procedure Bylaw has been updated, so questions will only be taken on staff reports, consent items, or other business items. Before we start the meeting, I would like to take a few moments to remind those who are attending in person about the rules of decorum for all Council and committee meetings. A meeting of Council is intended to be a place where democracy can freely take place in a respectful and safe manner. The Council chambers is a workplace, and there are considerations Council and staff must make to ensure that a safe work environment exists in accordance with WorkSafe BC regulations. To support this, disrespectful conduct will not be tolerated, so we ask that there be no cheering, jeering, or other outbursts from the gallery at any time. This will ensure that anyone speaking, whether it be a delegation, member of council, or staff, is not interrupted and can make their point freely without distraction or fear of ridicule. In instances where a speaker is being inappropriate or has exceeded their time limit, their microphone will be cut off. Similarly, if there are outbursts by any person in the gallery, they will be asked to stop, and if they do not comply, they may be asked to leave as permitted under Section 133 of the Community Charter. If necessary, Council may call a recess in order to reset the environment of the Council chambers. It is our belief that if everyone is respectful of these basic considerations, this meeting and future meetings will be more effective in furthering the business of the City of Nanaimo. The first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Gurry, we have none tonight.
Yes, thank you, Worship, and good evening, Council. For late items this evening, we have the addition of delegation from Alan Clark. He will be speaking to agenda item 10D, which is separately addressed consent items regarding the alternative approval process policy to be considered. Agenda item 12B, Nanaimo Operations Center, Public Works Yard, funding options. We're adding a PowerPoint presentation titled Nanaimo Operations Center, Public Works Yard, funding options. Agenda item 12C, development permit application number DP 1340-350 and 398 Franklin Street. We're adding a delegation from Sarah Eskandari, Brian Gartner, Coben Christensen, Ace Architecture, and Robin Kelly, Sophie Deneau, Jeremy Brunel from Group Deneau. My apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong. And then agenda item 12E, rezoning application number RA 501 for 3425 Uplands Drive, adding a delegation from Jackson Lowe, Selena Kwok, Lowe Hammond, Rowe Architects Inc., and Tini Lally. And we're removing agenda item 16C, letter of support request dated July 12th, 2024, from the Art Gallery, Nanaimo Hospitality Association feasibility study, as well, and not noted on your annotated, Your Worship and Council, item 16A under other business, Nanaimo Operations Center, Public Works Project, which was a motion that was deferred from the July 8th meeting. We're moving it to be the new the new 12C, which will immediately follow the presentation and recommendation from Laura Mercer. And that's it, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Motion for the adoption of the agenda is amended. Moved Councillor Hemmons, seconded Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. We have no minutes to adopt. I'll get into the Mayor's report. Firstly, a little reminder that the City of Nanaimo is seeking applications for the next Poet Laureate for a 2-year term from 2024 to 2026. The Poet Laureate is a literary ambassador for the City of Nanaimo. Through their role, they raise the profile of literary arts in our community by creating and presenting poetic works and activities that are relevant to our times and respond to our place. Nanaimo's next Poet Laureate will engage and inspire, contributing their own unique voice and experience to collaborate and realize poetry projects for the benefit of our community. Past City of Nanaimo Poet Laureates include Naomi Beth Walken, 2014 to 2017, Tina Biello, 2017 to 2020, and Kamal Pamar, 2021-2024, whose term is ending next month. All three poets made impactful and memorable contributions during their terms, bringing talent and passion to their role. If people are interested, please apply on the city website at https://www.nanaimo.ca/parks/recreation, culture, poetry, poet laureate. And the deadline to submit applications is Monday, September 16th by midnight. Particularly in light of what happened at Piper's Lagoon a few days ago, I would remind everyone that the Nanaimo Fire Service has issued a full ban on open fires as of noon, Friday, July the 12th. Following a provincial order, the City of Nanaimo has prohibited all fires. With hotter weather comes an increased risk of fire spreading quickly. As we note what happened at Piper's Lagoon, it is important for residents to be vigilant in fire safety and to report all fires immediately by calling 911. Solid fuel fires, such as wood fires, produce embers that can be extremely dangerous when combined with hot, dry, windy conditions. So please, folks, let's try and take care for our city and our environment. As I say, we know what happened at Piper's Lagoon. Where on July the 12th, the errant use of fireworks, including Roman candles, caused a massive blaze that quickly got out of control at Piper's Lagoon. I would remind everyone that not every part of the city is accessible by our firefighting equipment or our firefighters who put their lives at risk in order to control such fires. So please, again, be careful. Friendly reminder, we're at stage 2 water restrictions and they're in effect and have been since May the 1st and will last until September 30th unless otherwise advised. Even-numbered addresses can water on even-numbered days and odd-numbered addresses on odd-numbered days for up to 2 hours between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. and 10 p.m. Vegetable gardens and fruit trees can be watered at any time. In addition, hand watering of flowers, shrubs, ornamental trees, or hanging baskets can only be done at any time during stages 1 to 3 only. Our city's abundant water source is being managed carefully and is in good shape, and we don't expect any issues. On a sadder note, one of our workers today was seriously injured in a single vehicle accident while at work in the city as in hospital here in Nanaimo. And our thoughts and prayers are with him and his family, and we can only hope and wish the best to him. Finally, I want to finish on a happier and lighter note. It'll embarrass her and I'll probably receive much criticism later. On behalf of Council, happy birthday, Councillor Hemmens. No. You have to keep order here, both for good and the bad. We have nothing to rise and report, Ms. Gurry, obviously. We have no presentations, no committee minutes. A motion for adoption of the consent items. I'll ask that they be moved, and then Council can advise what they have to withdraw. So a motion for adoption. Moved Councillor Eastmere, seconded Councillor Hemmens, and I understand some withdrawals are requested. Councillor Gesselbrock, you're... No? Thank you. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I may, I would ask to remove on my annotated agenda, it's under 10B2, Nanaimo Builds for the Future Plan Part 2.
Okay, thank you. And the same for Councillor Perino. Ms. Gurry, we'll vote on the other items.
That's correct, Your Worship.
All right, the vote is for the consent adoption of the other for the adoption of the other consent items. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Councillor Thorpe, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I recognize that Council had discussion on this item at the Governance and Priorities Committee meeting of July 15, but I've given it some thought, and I hope other councillors have maybe given it the same consideration. That I think we sort of rushed to an option on the approval process for the borrowing. So I want to start by making it clear that I absolutely support the project of the South End Community Centre and the borrowing that will require. However, in my opinion, an alternate approval process for that borrowing is just simply not the correct way to go, and I would much prefer a referendum. And if I may speak further briefly to it, Your Worship, The AAP process is always with some controversy, and I am always willing to support it in situations where it is used for projects which we consider absolutely crucial for the good running of the city. Things like a police department office, the RCMP detachment office, or a new fire hall, or a public works yard. But for other items which are public facilities, as much and all as we would like to see them, I think that we need to give the public the full chance to voice their opinion, yes or no, through a referendum. So I would much prefer that this wording was altered to read for a referendum process. I don't know if that would be acceptable as an amendment or whether it would be considered a totally different motion. I suspect the latter, but I cannot support this the way it stands. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Gurry?
Thank you, Worship. So if there was an actual amendment that, that you replaced alternative approval process with a referendum, and the amendment passed, then the original motion would then be voted on as amended. However, if the amendment was seconded and voted on and failed, you would vote on the original motion as being an alternative approval process. So you could either vote on the motion as is or amend it if there's a seconder and vote on it that way. So there's a couple options.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gurry. So, Your Worship, if I may, through you, I would like to suggest an amendment to change the wording from an alternate approval process to a referendum for the borrowing for the South End Community Centre.
Seconded, Councillor Perino. Speak to it, Councillor.
I think I've spoken at length enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Perino? Speaking to the amendment?
Yes. Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate that. Everything that Councillor Thorpe said, of course, you know, ditto from me. The piece that I wanted to add that we had a lengthy discussion on, and I was really pleased, was that there are other projects that are community projects that I think the community wants to have a say in, and I think they might feel very positively. So, for example, we talked about, you know, the possibility of the walkway. We talked about the possibility of improvements to Bevan Park and some other things. And that, for me, was one of the reasons why I wanted a referendum. Everything that Councillor Thorpe said, but the addition of a referendum will help us to have a very clear message from the public about what they want us to be supporting. And that, for me, was really important. I want to save alternate approval processes for those projects, as Councillor Thorpe said, that we absolutely can't do without, and one of them, of course, is the public works yard. For me, this is a project that the community will benefit for because it just helps to improve the quality of their family's life. And that, for me, that's clearly referendum, and I think it will do very well.
Okay. Councillor Eastmer, are you trying to signal you were trying to get on the list by chance? I've had that discussion with Council earlier. Thank you. Councillor Eastmer?
I appreciate the comments. I strongly feel that because Council believes in the importance of this project, because we've heard from staff that there's been a demonstrated need for it, and because the South End has no recreation facilities like this, and we're putting in a lot of density in the South End, this is a project where there's a strong demonstrated need, the fact that all of Council's behind it. I think it is potentially disingenuous to roll it in with a bunch of other projects to get people out to a referendum when we know that it's needed for the growth of the city. And so I'm happy to support going to an AAP on this, and knowing that we would do the exact same amount of notice for an alternate approval process as for a referendum, and it's just simply a lower barrier for people to participate if they so choose, because they have much more time to weigh in, whereas a referendum is 1 day, the alternate approval process is at least 31 days. So for that reason, I'm not supporting this change in course. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gusselbrook?
Thanks, Your Worship. Through you, the motion just before this that was approved in the consent agenda says that direct staff to prepare to seek elector approval for the South End Community Centre, and that motion passed unanimously. I think everybody's in agreement that there's a deficit of recreational facilities in the south end, and we need to do something about that. You know, at the meeting, at the Governance and Priorities Committee meeting, you know, when we look at sort of what the price tag is for this facility, you know, potentially between $100 and $150 million, it's quite substantial. And I feel that there is a necessary pressure to figure out at this stage of the game whether we go do referendum or AAP. I think there's some other motions or other projects in the docket that we've consented to go ahead and look at, and there could be a combination of elements put on a potential referendum or on a potential AAP, could be separate, but I think we need to have a bit more detail on the costing and the scale and the scope and understand the options available. So my preference would be actually to defer a decision on whether we go AAP or referendum. We've already given direction to go ahead, you know, to look at the process for electoral approval, so I'd move deferral.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Manley? Care to speak any further to it?
No, thank you.
Just point of order, Chair.
Yes, Councillor Brown.
Oddly enough, very supportive of the deferral, but I just mechanically we have the amendment on the floor,
Deal
so
with
I'm
the
just
amendment.
okay.
Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Worship. Just before Council considers voting on the amendment, I would just ask that if Council is acceptable to put back in, if you remember at the GPC, we had a discussion about having a referendum in the spring of 2025. When the motion got amended, we just said we left out the date. So I think it would just add clarity to staff and to the community if the intention is to go back to put that language in, if you could also add in at the same time in the spring of 2025 as per the original recommendation. So it would just be direct staff to prepare for a referendum in the spring of 2025 for the borrowing for a South End Community Center.
Ms. Gurry.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I'm just wondering, the motion was moved and seconded to be deferred, and that was the amendment, which is what we're talking about. So that's going to be deferred. Possibly then, to Mr. Lindsay's suggestion, when it's brought back up again, we could add in the spring of 2025, or if council wanted to make an additional, well, it's been deferred, so I think the date would have to come after. So I think right now the motion to defer the amendment has to be dealt with prior to adding in or amending it to the spring 2025. Sorry, Mr. Lindsay.
And just to be clear, Councillor Gussie-Brock, you're moving to defer not just the amendment, but the motion itself.
Yeah, my understanding was that an alternate motion was put in the place of the one that's there. So instead of AAP, Councillor Thorpe moved a motion to put it to referendum, and I'm deferring that motion to put it to a referendum.
All right, I'm going to make a suggestion before we get mired here in deferrals and amendments, etc. I am sensing from council that what people would really like to vote on is whether we deal with this tonight in terms of approving one process or another. And I'm looking for nods around the table, including Councillors Brown and Armstrong, because if there's a general consensus that we simply don't wish to deal with it tonight, in light of the fact that we don't have a budget, for instance, for the South End Community Centre, that it could go back potentially to a further GPC for discussion when the numbers are somewhat better known and some other issues around that potential project have been settled. If I thought that was a consensus, I would politely suggest that we withdraw the amendment, that we withdraw the deferral and vote on that, but I'm in council's hands, but otherwise the vote to defer is that has been brought forward and seconded now, which I have accepted. I shouldn't have probably. Now puts us in this tricky position where we need to vote it down potentially to get back one step further. So, Councillor Thorpe,
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. No, I think we're in Ms. Gurry's hands here, and she can assist. I'm quite satisfied to defer this entire topic for further thought and further discussion when costing numbers are more clearly established, and I think that's fine with me. So I'm not clear whether we need to simply vote on the deferral of the entire subject, or whether we need to deal with my amendment, my proposed amendment first, and Ms. Gurry can perhaps guide us. Sorry to steer us into these turbid waters.
No problem. I understand this has gotten a little bit convoluted. So right now, there's a deferral on the amendment. My suggestion would be that you vote on that, and then you would vote on the main motion, and there could be a subsequent motion of deferral for that one. And it could say to defer to a future GPC meeting where a discussion on which method of approval of the electors could be discussed at that time. The time and method of approval of the electors for South End Community Center could be deferred to an upcoming meeting. I just want to make sure, if you don't mind, Mr. Lindsay, there doesn't foresee any issues with that? No. Okay.
I am not seeing a lot of Councillor Armstrong.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if I don't know if Mr. Harding's there or not, but you know, my understanding was that they wanted to get a decision because if APP or whatever referendum fails, then we're back to square one. Or are we gonna have to expend more money or what prior to a decision being made?
Mr. Lindsay, please.
Your Worship, I think Mr. Harding is online and he can jump in here. But what I would say was the real intention was to get us on the path moving forward to seeking alternative approval. And I agree that the decision could be deferred based on the subsequent motion you made on that the same day, and you've now endorsed here tonight. We'll be coming back in the fall with further information about the updated numbers on the waterfront walkway and options around Bevan. So I think once you have that information, I think as Councillor Geselbrecht said, you could step back and say, okay, do we want to package these together in a referendum or an AAP? So deferring the decision to when you have more details on those two other projects, I think is a good suggestion, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe? Okay.
Thanks, Your Worship. So again, I'm just not sure on the easiest way to move forward. I am willing to accept a deferral on this entire topic. But do we need to vote on my amendment, or should I withdraw it?
Yeah. So right
we
now,
have to
there's
vote on the deferral first,
Yes.
defeat it. We can then vote on deferral of the motion, the amended motion, the amendment, the amended motion, I should say.
So,
No, it's not amended yet.
yeah, so if you vote on the deferral and the deferral passed, and then you voted on the main motion and that passed, you could, if you voted on the main motion, if you put a deferral on the main motion and deferred it to a future meeting, both items, alternative approval process and referendum, would be discussed, which method you would choose to go forward with at a future meeting. And or you could defeat the deferral, like you said, vote on the main motion, or defer the main motion to a future meeting. So,
Council, for what it's worth, I'm not going to repeat what I said when we initially discussed this, but I thought it was premature to talk about the actual process for the South End Community Association. So I am going to suggest that we simply vote, as has been hinted at, to vote for the deferral of the deferral amendment, the deferral of the amendment, and then vote for deferral of the motion as well. I'm not seeing any further speakers. All those in favor of the deferral? And any opposed? Not seeing any, none. Councillor Prino is moving for deferral of the main motion. Seconded Councillor Hemmens. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Thank you very much. I appreciate the guidance to get out of this legislative quagmire, so to speak. Well done, everyone. The next separately addressed item, the alternative approval process policy. Now, Mr. Clark is a delegation on that, Ms. Gurry, so we're going to address that one separately.
that's correct, Your Worship.
All right, so we'll call Mr. Clark down to speak to it now. Mr. Clark?
Sorry about that.
No. Mr. Clark, if you'll state your name for the record, please, you'll have 5 minutes, and when you get to 4 minutes, I will let you know, and you'll have a minute left, please. Thank you.
Do I have the mic? Okay, thank you. Good evening. For those that don't know, my name is Alan Clark, and I live in Chase River. Tonight, I want to address council on the AAP process. The APP process is a flawed process. While the intention may be good, it is a process that is flawed. Provincial law states requirements of council to notify the public of, I'm sorry, I've got my notes a little confused here. So a minimum of what you're required to do. And this council has adopted those minimum requirements. The minimum requirements are not effective in notifying the citizens of Nanaimo that an AAP is pending, denying the citizens to be informed of an action by this council that's going to affect them all, allowing council to proceed by what is a negative vote. When council wants to move ahead with whatever AAP they are presenting, it is the best interest of council to do the minimum required by law, but it's not in the best interest of the citizens of Nanaimo. The less people respond, the better for council. After 2 failed AAPs, 2 outside law firms were consulted. Council then decided to engage a third party, Ms. Lisa Swan, to advise them in part on how to effectively implement an AAP. Ms. Swan gave a lengthy presentation including why both previous AAPs failed. It seems like staff did not follow the basic requirements by the province. Also, Ms. Swan recommends that the city only adhere to the basic requirements. And once again, it doesn't serve the citizens of this city. Under the Code of Conduct Bylaw 2022, number 7348, it clearly states upholding the public interest and making decisions in the interest of the community is a requirement of council and the mayor. Keeping citizens in the dark regarding AAP is not in the best interest of the public or the community. Council needs to increase the methods of notifying the public of any upcoming AAP as vigorously as if they were seeking re-election. It is a duty of council that the citizens that they are serving are aware of something as important as an AAP. I was shocked that many citizens are not even aware of what an AAP is, myself included, until I came to council for the first time back in April. If the reason for an AAP is requiring citizens' approval, then that reason should be strong enough that the citizens would approve it. If not, then council can go to a referendum, preferably attached to an election. Council also needs to consider the distribution of ballots. Ballots should be widely available to all citizens. Not only should they be aware of an impending AAP, but they should have easy access to a ballot form without having to run to City Hall to pick one up. Maybe they could be available at libraries, community centers, post office, as well as online for printing.
1 minute, Mr. Clark.
Thank you. Or better yet, a mail out to those that are eligible to vote, despite Ms. Swan's advising against it. It's time for council to do the right things for the city of Nanaimo and let the citizens of Nanaimo openly know what council is planning, like borrowing millions and millions of dollars, which will further increase property taxes by what is acceptable. I'm down to my last 30 seconds, and listening to the conversation, AAP was presented like it's an easier way. It's not meant to be an easier way, it's meant to be an alternative. And I think you're using it as an easier way without notifying public. The last 2 APPs, I didn't even know they existed. I'm not the smartest guy in the world. but I kind of like to think I can recognize these things. Thank you.
Thank you very
And I
much.
welcome any questions or comments.
Not seeing any. Councillor Gesselbrock.
Oh, thank you, Worship. Just in terms of response, you mentioned about accessibility, and it's something that this council has been thinking a lot about, making it accessible for the community to have their say. And the reason why you're able to speak to the AAP is that we passed in our governance and priorities, a new policy on our AAP. And basically, what we were allowed is you can do it online now. So it's very accessible. So you can get a form online and you can submit your papers online. And unlike a referendum where you just have one day to make it to the ballot box and have your say, you have an entire month to go online, fill out the form, and send it online. So it's extremely accessible, and I just want to make sure that you are aware of that because you mentioned that.
I'm sorry, I'm a little hard of hearing. Did I get it correctly that you said I can get the ballot form online and I can submit it online?
Absolutely. We just updated the policy to make those changes.
You just updated
and also, too, you mentioned that you weren't aware about the AAP beforehand.
No, I didn't
And
know.
another change that we made is that every time an AAP comes to council and that we send one out, we have to have a communications plan. So depending on the size of the AAP, if it's
Right.
something big, community-wide, most likely there'll be a community-wide mail-out, a month beforehand, so that, one, you're aware of the project and the details, but also about the AAP and how it works. So these changes have just been recently made, and I think that you'll find that it'll make it a much more accessible and easy process. So thank you for your comments.
And thank you, because I find it much more acceptable that if I can get the ballot form from online and reply to it online, and you're going to do a mail out, then I still think it's flawed, but I don't have the complaints that I was mentioning.
Right on.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item are delegations unrelated to agenda items. Dan Hula, re-enhancing positive relations and dialogue between council and Nanaimo citizens. Mr. Hula, state your name for the record. Sorry, Ms. Gurry.
Sorry, Your Worship, and before this delegation speaks, you still need to vote
Oh,
on
yes, sorry.
that consent item.
Yep. Motion's in front of us, as in the agenda. Doesn't need to be moved and seconded. It's on the agenda. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you. Mr. Hula, you know the drill. Introduce yourself for the record. You'll have 5 minutes. When there's a minute left, I will let you know. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dan Hula. As someone who has recently made multiple presentations to City Council and viewed the presentations of others, I'm in a good position to make some observations and suggestions. One, Council has mentioned often that these meetings are an opportunity for citizens to participate in the democratic process. My understanding of this is that citizens investigate topics that concern them and feel would be a concern to the city at large. One would expect that such concerns, when presented, would then be recognized, discussed, questioned, and even have someone on council look into the topic to further verify their validity and the significance to the city. Two, it would also be expected that when ideas are presented that do not coincide with the current opinions of council, that those ideas would still be respected as those of someone who has taken the time and energy to research and present them. A difference of opinion or perspective does not have to be interpreted as a personal attack. Three, when a presentation format is met with dismissive silence twice in a row after including as much evidence as one can squeeze into a 5-minute delegation, a change of style was my attempt to encourage engagement. It is offensive to continue to refer to my last presentation in a derogatory manner. The point I was making about election integrity was entirely overlooked. 4, several times, members of council have resorted to stating that if citizens do not like what council is doing, that they should show it in the next election by voting or running. Although this is an important component of the democratic process, it does not preclude bringing up uncomfortable topics as delegations in council meetings. A true democracy has constant engagement, not just once every 4 years. 5, Our collective species has never made any noteworthy achievements by having its citizens being ordered to sit down, shut up, and do what you're told. So increasing censorship of citizens diminishes the credibility of the authority of any level of government. City council, as other governments, are elected officials as public servants, not as dictators. 6, in conclusion, I suggest that council actually engage with all delegations, like they did with the rezoning in the June 17th meeting. That was really good. It would also go a long way if at least one member of council would take the time to look into issues presented and do any kind of a follow-up comment at a later meeting. It would be well worth your time to go back and actually pay attention to the themes and evidence that I previously presented here, so that your legacy will not be one of leaders who dismiss true facts as conspiracy, only later to be proven wrong. Being in a position of power as council, it's your place to set the tone of giving respect to get respect. And I'm sure that you would quickly see positive results of acting on these suggestions. I noticed that I was the only person signed up for delegations not related to agendas, and maybe if people see that it is more responsive from council, you would get more citizens being involved like I try to be. Thank you, and I welcome your questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hula. Not seeing any questions. Thank you. The next item is reports, and the first is fees and charges amendment, RCMP services fees. Ms. Gurry, please.
Thank you, Worship, and good evening again, Council. This bylaw is in front of you based on Ms. Robertson's report from the previous council meeting. It is to bring forward an amendment to the fees and charges bylaw that incorporates the direction provided by you at your July 8, 2024 council meeting regarding criminal record check and fingerprinting fees.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hemmons, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I move that Fees and Charges Amendment Bylaw 2024, number 7336.10, a bylaw to amend the police services RCMP fees for criminal records, checks, and fingerprinting pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. I move that Fees and Charges Amendment Bylaw 2024, number 7336.10, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries.
I move that Fees and Charges Amendment Bylaw 2024, number 7336.10, pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is 12B, Nanaimo Operations Center Public Works Yard Funding Options. Ms. Mercer. Ms. Fulla, good evening.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, I'll just wait for them to get the PowerPoint up. Okay. So good evening. So at the June 24th GPC meeting, the council or the committee recommended that council direct staff to proceed with the highest needs in a single phase option of the Nanaimo Operations Center or the Public Works Yard Update Project. As well, the committee asked staff to look at other funding options with respect to debt servicing. So to that end, we're here tonight to provide you those funding options and seek your direction on what option you would like to proceed with. So the highest needs in a single phase option would see the construction of the fleet. I just muted myself. And the administration buildings along with some stormwater management infrastructure. So the projected budget for this project is $90 million. And all of the funding options presented tonight are based on this projected budget. So you've seen these pictures before. The middle one is the project rendering and a couple of looks at the different looks that the buildings could have that are proposed in this option. So the report outlines the funding sources available to the project, and I'll go through each one in some detail. So the first option we have is reserves. So as you know, reserves provide the largest funding source for projects, and the city has a reserves policy that governs development, maintenance, and the use of reserves, including the requirement of minimum balances where appropriate. So just as an update on one of the reserves, so with the new Canada Community Building Fund BC agreement, which is the Community Works Fund or the gas tax money, we've now received that agreement, and we know that the Community Works Fund is not an allowable funding source for a public works facility. However, staff are able to move some funding sources around to free up the General Asset Management Reserve Fund to be used on this project. So by doing this funding shift, the Community Works Fund would be fully allocated until the end of 2026. So there would be no other funding available for that money to be used for. So the three most appropriate reserves for the funding of this project are the General Asset Management Reserve Fund, the General Capital Reserve, and the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve Fund. So first, the General Asset Management Reserve Fund is funded from an allocation of property taxes and currently has a projected 2024 closing balance of about $13.9 million, and it has a minimum balance required of just over $6.1 million. So this reserve is the major source of funding for general funded renewal projects. As well, it funds the city's share of transportation, drainage, and parks DCC projects, as well as it funds the debt servicing for Fire Station Number 1. So with the ability to shift some funding of projects from the General Asset Management Reserve over to the Community Works Fund, this would free up funding to be used on the project. And options 1, 2, and 3 all have a funding component from the General Asset Management Reserve Fund. The next reserve available is the General Capital Reserve, and this reserve has no dedicated funding source, and its contributions come from allocations of surplus. So the current projected 2024 closing balance of $5 million could be allocated to the project, or the reserve balance could be maintained to allow the city to respond to other opportunities. And our last option under the reserves category is the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve, or the SIR. So this reserve is funded annually by revenues from the Fortis operating agreement and 2/3 of the casino revenues. And this is allocated by council to support strategic initiatives and capital projects. So the current projected 2024 closing balance in this reserve is about $1.9 million, with a minimum balance requirement of $345,300. So council could allocate funding from this reserve to the project, or the reserve balance could be maintained to allow council to fund other strategic priorities or capital projects. So on an annual basis, council does fund $600,000 for property acquisition and $300,000 for unallocated pedestrian improvements from this reserve each year. The second funding source available is internal borrowing from reserves. So under Section 189 of the Community Charter, the city is allowed to borrow between capital reserve funds, and the city has utilized internal borrowing for some sewer DCC projects, and that borrowing was done from the Drainage DCC Reserve Fund that had some money at the time. So looking at all the reserves, there really only is two reserves, or are two reserves, that have a substantial enough balance in it to actually borrow from. And that one is the Sewer Operating Reserve, and the other is the General Financial Stability Reserve. So the Sewer Operating Reserve provides funding for studies, condition assessment programs, and renewal or new or upgraded infrastructure required to maintain service levels. So staff would not recommend internal borrowing from this reserve, as currently the Sewer DCC Reserve has significant funding challenges, and reducing the overall available sewer funding will limit council's options in addressing growth-related challenges to sewer infrastructure. And the second one is the General Financial Stability Reserve. So the city's reserve policy strives to maintain the Government Finance Officers Association recommendation of 45 to 90 days of working capital in this reserve to address any unanticipated events. So the anticipated 2024 closing balance is $17 million, and it requires a minimum balance of $17 million approximately to meet that 45-day level of funding. So internal borrowing from this reserve would require the city to budget to repay the funds back over a reasonable time frame. And it would be the priority of any general operating surplus allocation until that minimum balance was achieved again. And while internal borrowing from this operating reserve would reduce the overall internal costs related to borrowing, the loss of investment income that the city would have earned on it needs to be netted against any savings. So just, interest income earned on operating reserves goes into general revenue and does reduce taxes. Our third option is external borrowing. So any major project that will benefit future residents are a good candidate for borrowing, based on the assumption that since future residents will benefit from the project, they should also share in the cost by paying the debt servicing through future property taxes. And the 20-year investment plan that was presented to Council in 2023 was based on and included the recommendation that borrowing be used to fund these projects. And our last option is property taxation. So staff would not recommend funding a large capital project from property taxation when external borrowing is an option. So if the project was funded from property taxation, it would result in significant short-term increases in property taxes to generate enough funding necessary for the project, and or it could result in a significant decrease to service levels to generate enough savings to be allocated to the project. So those are the 4 funding sources available for this project, and I'll walk you through the 4 funding options to fund that $90 million single phase project. So staff have looked at various funding combinations and have put forward options that look at reducing the borrowing needed while maintaining some resiliency in the reserves to react to unplanned situations that may arise. Some of the assumptions that are made in each one of these options are the borrowing term is 20 years, the interest rate of 4.58% is used for the entire term of the borrowing. The dollar values are based on a typical home valued at $783,808, and the estimated tax impact is based on 1% of taxes in 2024 dollars. So option 1 would see the project funded with $16.8 million from the General Asset Management Reserve and $73.2 million from external borrowing. Debt servicing would be funded fully from property taxation, and the estimated cost to a typical house for this option is estimated at $113 per year. Some things to consider when you're looking at this option. Of the 4 options, this one has the lowest total cost of borrowing as $16.8 million in funding is coming from the General Asset Management Reserve Fund. This option leaves more future borrowing capacity for other projects. Should Council choose to do more borrowing in the future, it gives you a bit more room. And with debt servicing coming from property taxation, there is no long-term commitment to the General Asset Management Reserve Fund. While the funding from the General Asset Management Reserve Fund does reduce the borrowing needed, it also reduces the city's ability to fund other projects that may be needed, as that money is now being allocated to this project. And as I mentioned in an earlier slide, the 20-year investment plan recommended that funding for this project would come from long-term borrowing. And as allocating money from that reserve was not anticipated, it will increase the funding gap and may require other projects to be reprioritized based on funding available. And the last point I'll make with this one is with the project funding shift to the Community Works Fund to free up General Asset Management Reserve Fund monies, the Community Works funding will be fully allocated to the end of 2026 and cannot be used for other projects. So should Council wish to choose option 1, this would be the recommended wording for the motion. So option 2 would fund the
Councillor Hemmons has a question.
Sorry if I may, just specific to this one. If we go with option 1, we will not have Community Works funds replenished until 2026. What is our pattern of spending from Community Works funds, and have we ever had a zero balance for more than a year? Would that be considered best practice?
Through your worship, to Councillor Hemmons. So the funds may be committed, but they don't always come out all at the same time. So I don't think we've ever had a zero reserve balance, but it's most of the money has been committed. with the last agreement ending this year, the requirement was that we needed to allocate all of those funds. So I believe most of the funding was allocated to specific projects. And now we have a new agreement, and so we will be allocating that money as well.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor Thorpe, and then Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Your Worship. Perhaps you can clarify for me, because although I'm prepared to support one of these options at this time, it seems to me that this discussion is certainly related to the item under other business near the end of our meeting, where we had a recommendation deferred regarding how much borrowing to do all at once or over phases.
Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Thorpe. So under late items, I did move that other business item to immediately follow this and basically form part of this discussion. So you'll be looking at these funding options as Ms. Mercer goes through them and presents them to you, and then you'll be considering that other business has now been moved to follow this item.
Perfect. Thanks very much.
Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Your Worship. And a question through you to Ms. Mercer. I've just, I'm trying to, the language is always a little bit difficult to understand completely, and I'm just wondering if you can just clarify for me. So the $73.2 million in the option one from external borrowing with debt servicing funded by property taxation. So that is not going to the long-term borrowing that we talk about with an alternate approval process or a referendum. That is actually just taxation. Is that correct? I don't think I'm right. That's why
No. Through Your Worship, to Councillor Perino. So we would access $73.2 million from borrowing, and the debt repayment of that borrowing would be funded through property taxation.
Through it, but long-term through?
Yes, for 20 years, that would be paid through property taxes.
Through either an alternate approval process?
Either way, yes.
Gotcha, thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Worship. I'm glad Councillor Thorpe asked his question there, because I was wondering the same thing. But I also just extending upon that a little bit, just noting that we referred a motion that came out of GPC that had some discussion. I'm just wondering, I'm just confused why this presentation is here. It's been really good so far, but is it new information? I'm just not totally tracking.
Mr. Lindsay.
So, Your Worship, and I recognize, I think partly because we had the first discussion and there was a motion for deferral at your last council meeting, that we've kind of ended up in this situation tonight. So staff did have direction from an earlier GPC meeting, and it was ultimately approved through consent of council that you wanted a report on the direction you took regarding project in terms of funding options. Sorry, thank you, Mr. Sims. Funding options for the Public Works project. So staff have followed up, prepared that report in advance. I think we're working on that, and then there was the motion to defer. So we have a bit of collision of these two reports, but I think by bringing them together, hopefully council can have one discussion all at once. We can answer questions. I know what you're seeing here tonight, Councillor Brown, is really focused on options around the $90 million version, but if council did want to go back and consider other versions, I think staff are prepared to support you in that discussion now or in the subsequent item.
Okay, so for my clarity, this is that follow-up motion being realized.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
Very good, thank you. Ms. Mercer, please.
So I can get my clicker working again. So option 2 would see the project funded with $10.8 million from the General Asset Management Reserve and $79.2 million from external borrowing. Debt servicing funding would be split at 75% from property taxation and 25% from the General Asset Management Reserve. And the estimated cost to a typical house for this option is estimated at $92 per year. Of the 4 options, this one results in the lowest property tax increase as funding to reduce the borrowing amount, and the 25% of the debt repayment costs are funded through the General Asset Management Reserve Fund. As with the last option, while the funding from the reserve does reduce the borrowing needed, it also reduces the amount of funding that's available to other projects if needed. And again, the 20-year or the 20-year investment plan implications are the same, where you'd see that debt increasing as we've accessed reserves to fund some of the project that wasn't anticipated. With 25% of the debt servicing costs coming from the General Asset Management Reserve Fund, it ties up that money in the reserve until 2049. And this could impact project prioritization based on the funding available in the long term. And again, recommended wording for a motion if council chose to use option 2. Option 3 would see the entire project funded from external borrowing, so the full $90 million would be external borrowed. Debt servicing funding would be again split between 75% from property taxation and 25% from the General Asset Management Reserve. And the estimated cost to a typical house for this option is estimated at $104 per year. So the city has borrowing capacity to fully fund the project from borrowing, so there is no issues there. And it reduces the amount of property tax increase needed by funding a portion of the debt servicing from the General Asset Management Reserve. So both options 3 and 4 fund the full project from borrowing, and this results in the highest total cost of borrowing. As with the last option, the funding 25% of the debt servicing costs from that General Asset Management Reserve does tie up that money again till 2049, and again could impact project prioritization. Recommended wording for a motion if council chose this option. And our last option is option 4, and that sees again the entire project funded from borrowing, so the full $90 million. Debt servicing would be fully funded from property taxation, and the estimated cost to a typical house for this option is estimated at $139 per year. Again, the city has full capacity as the ability to fully borrow for the project. With debt servicing coming from property taxation, there is no long-term commitment from the General Asset Management Reserve, so that frees up that money to be used for other projects. And this option supports the 20-year investment plan as the project is fully funded from borrowing and the debt servicing is funded from property taxation. And as with option 3, this project is the highest total cost of borrowing as the full amount is borrowed. And the motion, recommended wording for the motion if option 4 is the selected option. So our next steps. So once council decides on a funding option tonight, staff will come back to the July 29th special council meeting with a borrowing bylaw for first 3 readings. So through the summer, inspector approval will be sought, and public engagement would take place in the fall with the start of an AAP. And that is the end of my presentation. I'll be happy to take any questions, and staff is here to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mercer. Councillor Manley, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Recalling the previous plan, we had I think it was $48.5 million for the full project, and I think it was $13.5 million was contingency fund. So somewhere in the 26 to 28% range of contingency over and above what the estimated cost was, to make sure that if there was any cost overruns, there was money there. I'm curious about this $90 million option. How much of that $90 million for borrowing is set aside as contingency funding?
Mr. Lonsdale is going to try to answer that question for you.
Okay, thanks.
Good evening, please.
Thank you. If I may, through your worship, to Councillor Manley. I don't have the figures directly in front of me right now. However, the percentage remains from what had previously been put towards council. So it's about 25%. Into this new option, again, is about 25%. Those numbers come from the city's project management framework, which is a policy that the city has on how we manage and administer these major capital projects to make sure that the monies that are being spent on them are getting the best value for the community and the best value for the city, and that the risks are being managed appropriately. So that is to say, I don't have the dollar figure, however, it's about 25%.
Okay, so that's a good comfort level to go forward in a build, and to ensure we don't have to come back and ask for more money. I have a second question just around the current rate is 4.58%. That's from the Municipal Funding Authority. And if interest rates go down between now and when we actually need to borrow, which is likely, if the AAP goes through, it will be 2025 we would borrow in the fall, is that correct?
Through your worship, yes, we would not borrow, we would not draw on that borrowing until the fall of 2025, at which time interest rates will be different in all likelihood. If it is lower, then the cost of borrowing will be lower as well. So the impact to the taxpayer would be less.
Is there a formula for that determining that percentage? Is it like prime plus a certain amount, or how is it determined, do you know?
That's a good question.
Through the chair to Councillor Manley. So for when we're doing projections on debt servicing for instances like this where council is looking at external borrowing and we're going to go for electoral approval, we're required to use the indicative rate. So they use historical interest rates and they project out and they require us to use that. So it's not the current interest rate, it is what kind of the trend shows. And so whatever the term of the borrowing that we're going to do, that's the indicative rate we're required to use for any presentations like this to the public and to council to give you an idea of what interest will be. Because of course, the interest rate will be set likely for the first 10 years, and then it'll reset at 15 years and again at 20 years. So the rate's going to change during the term of the loan and the costs will change. And we will be doing our borrowing as the cash flow requires it. So the borrowing will be over a number of years and the interest rate could change on each borrowing. That's the same that happened with Fire Station number 1. We did multiple borrowings and no two borrowings have the same interest rate.
Okay, so we could borrow $5 million to start, and that would be a 10-year rate, and then we could borrow another 10, and that would be at a 10-year rate at whatever the level is. Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Perino, and then Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Your Worship, and a question as well. We always talked about the extra projects. There was a point where it was we were going for 48 million, and then there were the extra projects. Some of them, which could be funded just from regular taxation, just from regular reserves. Do we have an idea about how much that is, and which reserve fund would those come from?
Through your worship to Councillor Perino. So we, at this point, wouldn't know because those projects haven't been put into the project plan as yet. So when those come into the 5-year, like if they go into a 10-year plan, into the 5-year plan, we would look at funding options at that point. For a 5-year budget, we have to have a balanced budget. So we have to be able to have a funding source for whatever is in the plan. So at that point, once those projects start going into the financial plan, then we would look at a funding source at that point.
But if we go with options 1 or 2, then even option 3, don't we run the risk of bringing down that GAMR fund?
Yeah, the General Asset Management Reserve, yeah. So if you pull money from any reserve, whether it's this one or any other ones, that money is just not available to be used for other projects that may come up.
Okay, and just one other question, if I might, Your Worship. When Councillor Manley was talking about how the rates may change, could the rates, whatever they are, depending on how much the city in fact grows in population, more houses, obviously we're building lots of different multifamily housing, will that make a difference to what is charged per home?
Through your worship, it could. We do budget for some growth each year. The last few years have been, we've had one year that was kind of extraordinary from the other years, but it's generally consistent, even though we have had growth. So it could impact, but we do, that part of that is factored already into the rates.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lindsay, did you wish to say something, or is your hand up from before? Thank you. Councillor Armstrong and then Councillor Hemmons, please.
Thank you. Yeah, this is one I do have concerns about going into our asset management funds too much, because for me, those should be more for emergencies than for something that we know we're having to build. I'm sitting in Calgary where they've just had another a break in a water main. So, you know, we were having aging infrastructure too, and I'm very concerned about eliminating those funds. So for me, I'm seriously looking at option 4 or 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hemmons and Councillor Brown. And then I'd like to say something about this.
Thank you, Your Worship. Regarding option 3, I'm curious if the rationale, so option 1 is to use the general asset management reserve. Option 2 is to use a little bit less of that reserve. Option 3 is to use that reserve for debt servicing. Is the intention behind that to keep that reserve at a certain level, so we're not drawing on it to borrow to build, but we're drawing on it more minimally to repay that debt? Is that the thinking behind that, to leave that reserve a bit healthier?
Through your worship, yes. Well, we're trying to keep some resilience in that reserve. So, you know, there are a lot of projects. We have, you know, billions of dollars in assets that at some point need to be renewed, updated, replaced. So Ms. Fulla needs as many options as she can. So we were looking at, it gives some benefit to the taxpayer of a reduction, but it still leaves the money in the reserve to be used for other projects.
I see that, and I thank you for all the options. Lots of information here. I'm with Councillor Armstrong. I would be very hesitant to see us dip into our asset management reserve for this project. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thanks, Your Worship. Very similar sentiment to Councillor Hemmons and Councillor Armstrong. You know, I will undoubtedly get the numbers wrong here because it's been a while since I've heard them, and I'm sure they've changed. But the whole reason we have the asset management reserve fund was, you know, we have a $200 million infrastructure gap, and you know, we know the costs of whatever those replacement costs have undoubtedly changed, and it's only gone in one direction, more expensive. So you know, as appealing as it can be to suggest we use that fund, something else has to give, and that's going to be, you know, going a couple years longer and hoping another pipe doesn't burst, those sorts of things. So as much as it might be tempting, I just think it, you know, that pain might not be felt by this council, but it sets future councils up in an irresponsible way. And you know, I've been critical, and rightfully so, of past councils for some of their financial decisions, which what I would call financial mismanagement that has led to a lot of these scenarios. And I would hate to do that to someone else. So I would struggle with such an approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I really understand and appreciate the comments of Councillor Armstrong and Hemmons, but I'd like to suggest coming at it from a different angle. We have earlier in this meeting talked about the possibility of referendum or AAP regarding other major projects for our city that we would like to see undertaken. And those projects will also involve long-term borrowing and voter approval, obviously. So I know our city is in a very healthy position regarding our ability to borrow, but to me, the more we borrow for this project reduces council's comfort level to borrow too much for other projects. I'm not saying we wouldn't be able to still borrow, but we wouldn't be as comfortable approaching our borrowing ceiling. So to me, option 2 is more of a compromise where we don't take as much from our reserve, and at the same time, we don't commit quite as much to our long-term borrowing for this one project. I want us to still feel in a good position about approving borrowing for things like the South End Community Centre. And I think borrowing too much for this project will reduce our comfort level for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have always felt the same way about this. Well, I feel the same way today as I did when we started down this process. I get the concern about the comfort level that Councillor Thorpe has talked about, but we don't know where interest rates are going to go and what they're going to be like in 10 years. I can remember when my father-in-law was so proud to brag about getting a 5-year term on a Canada Savings bond at 10%, and I thought it was ridiculous tying it in at such a low rate because of the way interest rates were. Well, of course, within a little while, that 10% made him look like a financial genius. We have a number of projects that we're considering, a number of things that are important. I come back to this. I take the view, and this will raise some consternation with those who've spoken about the AAP. The AAP process for me is philosophically, politically, legally is designed to basically give an option to the voters to say no to a project that council, by its choice to use an AAP, has already said, look, we really need to do this, we have to do this, it's important, it is one of our fundamental responsibilities. From my perspective, I don't want to wish to be dipping into any of the funds, GMAR or otherwise, because quite simply, the first two options mean that those monies won't be available, as Councillor Hemmons and Councillor Armstrong have pointed out. If we go into an economic downturn, this city is in an excellent position to carry on with capital construction at a time when, if we are in a recession or an economic downturn, we will have an opportunity with those funds in place to deal with emergencies such as Bowen Road. And I'm looking at Mr. Sims. What did that project go from during these high inflationary times? 30, 40 million to over $50 million for the most basic of things, water that was necessary to keep our hospital running, for heaven's sakes. So I'd rather leave the money in the kitty and borrow the full 90 million and go for option 4. My view is this is an important thing, and that's the appropriate thing to do now. There's no motion on the floor, and Councillor Hemmons wants to speak again. Ms. Gurry?
Thank you, Worship, and I'll just be quick. I was just thinking process-wise, I'm not sure if you want to move on to the next discussion about the 90 million and then come back to the funding option after that, now that you've had this presentation.
I think that's a very wise idea, and I always defer to people more intelligent and thoughtful than me, Ms. Gurry, and I say that without any sarcasm, believe me, tonight. Councillor Hemmons, and then we'll move on to the next discussion and then come back and discuss this further.
I was going to make a motion, Your Worship, so I think perhaps I should wait.
I think that's timely. So, on to the next discussion, Ms. Mercer, if we will, which is item 16A. If you can provide some commentary and we can discuss this, that was Councillor.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the motion was made that the highest needs in a single phase option was selected. And there was 3 options. One was the status quo, so do the $48.5 million option. And so that was the same as the last 2 AAPs we did. Option 2 was a modified status quo where the phase 1 fleet maintenance building and the stormwater management would be done in that project, and that was a $44.5 million project. And then option 3 was the highest needs. So those were the options available to the council at that time. And as you've just seen the presentation, we did it on the 90 million, but you have options to do one of the other 2 as well.
And just to clarify, Your Worship, so the motion that was moved and passed at the GPC was that council direct staff to proceed with the highest needs and single phase option and prepare a borrowing bylaw in support of the project. It then went to council under consent at July the 8th and was pulled from consent and deferred to this meeting. So that motion is still in need to be dealt with. So before you moved on to alternative motions, you would need to amend or defeat this motion or pass this motion, but this motion would need to be dealt with.
Thank you very much. And just for the benefit of people who are listening and watching tonight, at the Governance Priorities Committee meeting, we discussed this matter at length, and council decided, although it's not final until council makes the decision sitting as council, that the Nanaimo Operations Center would proceed on the basis, potentially, of a highest, as we use the phrase, highest needs in a single phase option. The estimate of that was $90 million. Mr. Sims nodding sagely, so I know I'm on the right path. And then how we borrowed those monies, whether through AAP or referenda, would be a matter for another discussion as well. But for what it's worth, that's where we're at. Councillor Hemmens.
Thank you. I will move the motion in the agenda.
As in 16A.
That's right. The
Very
highest
good.
need, single phase.
Is there a seconder? Moved Councillor Manley. Discussion on this motion, as opposed to where we go with potential borrowing. Councillor Hemmens, please.
Thank you. I provided my rationale during the GPC for this, but high level I will say that I wish this had been an option at the outset, I think. However, I'm worried that if we go with the multi-phase, we're not going to see that admin building for potentially a decade, and that, in my mind, is we need as much as the fleet maintenance building. So I'm also concerned about the escalating costs of capital projects. If we push this out, chances are we're going to see this go up by tens of millions of dollars. And finally, in terms of what average households are being asked to pay, I think $139,000 for a new public works yard, which is basically our fourth emergency service, is $139. What did I say?
1,000.
Oh my gosh. I think that's a reasonable cost. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In order, Councillors Perino, Manley, and Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. And just a couple more questions for staff. Ms. Mercer, if you can just, I'm like Councillor Brown, I've forgotten some of the discussion, but we talked about if we go with the 90 million, what we're actually going to be saving is about 10 million to be able to do the two projects together. Maybe Mr. Sims, I apologize. And can you just explain that further? Because originally we were talking about not only the two projects, but the other projects that I had mentioned earlier. So we were up at around 160 million. Now we're down to 90. Can you just explain that for certainly the viewing public? Just very quickly, I apologize for making you go through this again.
Sure, if you want to take it.
Your Worship, that's an excellent question. As Councillor Perino noted, the four-stage master plan that was originally envisioned a year ago saw this sort of roll out in 4 different stages, and the total value estimated, with all the usual caveats last year, totaled up around $163 million. The revised version that shows what we call those highest needs in a single phase, which is the fleet building and the administration building, total about $90 million. So we're deferring or building the other works later, so we're saving a significant amount in long-term borrowing. So any other works that we would do, renovations to the Parks Operations Yard as an example, would be folded into the regular capital plan as opposed to going to the well of long-term borrowing for those funds. So right away the impact on the borrowing cost is quite a bit less. We've gone from 163 million down to 90 million. Not to say that the total project cost when we build it out over the next decade or so won't be high, like it'll be more, but we'll avoid that cost of borrowing.
Okay.
The other thing that we save here on the doing the two projects at the same time or simultaneously is the escalation cost for the admin building, which would be a few years down the road. So we estimate that escalation cost alone to be about $10 million. So that is saved by doing that work at this particular time. And as Councillor Hemmens noted, we're seeing on these large scale projects significant escalation. We're hoping and crossing our fingers that that's now sort of starting to taper off. But over the last few years, we've seen, $1 million a month in capital increases or capital cost increases. So I hope that covers off the question.
It does. And Mr. Sims, just while you've got the mic, can you just tell us again how many admin staff would you be putting into a new building of this type?
Well, there'd be, it was, when we say admin building, it's, that's the sort of front office, so there's, a dozen or so of front office staff, but operating out of the administration building is about 170 staff total.
Okay.
And we would be, as part of, should this motion go ahead, incorporating a number of staff from the Parks Operations group as well into the so-called admin building, the Public Works building at the front. Yes.
And one more question, Your Worship, to Ms. Mercer. The option that we were looking at for the South End Community Center, which we all agree at this table is desperately needed. How we fund it is of course, a different additional piece of information. But I'm just wondering, could we carry both the 90 million and the possible escalation of 150 million for the South End Community Center? Would that be possible under our borrowing terms?
Through Your Worship. So there is borrowing capacity to do that, and you would be fine. And we would come back to you with funding options again for that project to see where we could, if there was a mix, if it was straight borrowing. So we would come back to you with those kind of things as well. But you would be within your borrowing capacity to do that.
Okay. I just thought an awful lot about this over the last few weeks, and I certainly agree with Council that it's a better option to get it done, particularly because of the way construction is going and the way the city's growing and the endless reasons of why we need it. It's no doubt it's desperately needed, but to go from 48 million to do the 90 million to get the whole project done is both mind-boggling and important. And so I'm anxious to hear from all the council.
Thank you very much. Councillor Manley, then Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. During the debate, like the previous public discussion about the AAP, I heard councillors from the 2004 council and the 2005 council say that this was a project that they knew about that needed to be done, and if they had done it then, we would have looked at a much smaller bill to get this thing across the finish line. I think it's an important project to get done. I appreciate the fact that we're saving a lot of money to do this, that there's considerable savings, and that the most important parts of the project will be completed, and we will be seeing the other parts done through renovations and farther over time. So I do support this option. I think it's the right thing to do at this time to see this through. And I know in our discussions at the governance or the finance committee, where we talked about the amount of borrowing that we can do, we're right now at about 13.5% of our limit for the cost of borrowing, and so we do have a lot of room. We are very prudent. I think this council is very prudent about how we spend money, but this is a project that we've had previous council know about for decades, and so it's not going to get any cheaper. I do not believe. And then again, we're looking at a 25% contingency, which means that we may be spending less than $70,000, and we may be looking at lower interest rates as well, because that seems to be what the trend is pointing at. So for those reasons, I'm going to support this option. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Thorpe, please.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Through you, yes, I also have given this a lot of thought, and as our earlier discussion, I appreciate the views of other councillors. But again, I'm going to suggest some alternate reasoning for why I don't feel I can support this option. First of all, this was not the original proposal that we had brought to us by staff, which was the recommended route to go, which was a phased approach. And the fact is that by revising to what we're calling a one and done, this does alter the layout physically of the project, and to me it compromises some aspects of the Public Works yard. One and done, that's a neat slogan. It sounds great. But the fact is, this project is not going to get done overnight anyway. The reality is it is still going to have to be done in phases, I suspect. And I really question whether we would want to, or whether we would need to, borrow the complete amount of 90-some million dollars all at once, when we could be borrowing it in chunks to do the phases, rather than paying back interest on the full amount over the years. And I come back to an earlier comment that I made about comfort of borrowing, and I recognize again that we do have capacity to borrow, but borrowing less on this project in order to do it in phases will allow us more comfort to borrow money for our other projects that we desperately want to see also off the ground. Again, I recognize we have capacity, but the closer we get to our borrowing limit, the less comfort council will have about proceeding. So I would prefer that we go back to the original staff recommendation, which was to do this project in phases, and that will be my preference when it comes to voting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For what it's worth, I'm persuaded that the one and done, to use that phrase, I'll trumpet another well-worn phrase, better, what is it? Don't let the pursuit of the perfect stand in the way of doing the good. We come back to the basics. Councillor Manley's reminded everybody, councils have been punting this around for a very long time. And we have no credibility if we punt this further down the road after all these years, and I am more than satisfied. This is an absolute basic. This is a must-to, not a nice-to-have, and therefore I'm going to support the motion. It's been seconded. I'm not seeing any other speakers. So all those in favor? Councillors Eastmere, Gesselbrock, Hemmens, Mayor Krogh, Councillor Prino, Councillor Manley, Councillor Armstrong, Councillor Brown. Opposed? Councillor Thorpe. I've often been the lone person out myself lately. Welcome to the club. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Back now, if you will, to the recommendation that Ms. Mercer made in 12C, pardon me, D, and that is that Council direct staff proceed with one of the presented funding options, etc. So, Council. Councillor Hemmens.
Your Worship, I'll move option 4, please.
Can we have a seconder? Seconded, Councillor Perino. Discussion, Councillor Hemmens, please.
Thank you. I think we've had fairly fulsome discussion on this. I appreciate staff's desire to see us kind of struggle with this and figure out where we could pull some of the money from, but ultimately, as I said, I'm very hesitant to touch those reserves. And the price differential is actually not that great. It's about $30 per household for the average house. So I actually think this is a better option. It leaves those reserves intact for those things that we don't anticipate, like blown pipes on Bowen Road and the hospital losing water, that we always need to have money in the bank for such stuff like that. So I think this is our best option. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And not seeing anyone else, I must, Councillor Thorpe, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. This was not my preferred option, but given the decision that was just made with the previous motion, I am prepared to support this motion because I do want to see this project move ahead. Absolutely, it is crucial, so I will support it.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to wax on here tonight. Councillor Hemmens has said it very succinctly in my view, so if I'm not seeing any further speakers, and I'm not, all those in favor? And any opposed? None. It carries. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate the amount of thought that's gone into this and the work and preparation by staff, but particularly by council. I know this has been a challenging proposition for people coming to conclusion and deciding what's in the best interest of the citizens of Nanaimo, but I'm satisfied. I think the unanimity here tonight indicates we've made the right decision. The next is C, Development Permit Application Number DP 1340-350 and 398 Franklin Street. Mr. Holm, good evening, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship and Council. I won't say too much about this one. We have a delegation prepared to speak to this, but this is a number of properties in the downtown area fronting on Franklin, Robson, and Wesley Street. You'll see the properties outlined in red on the screen. There you go. So yeah, multiple properties fronting on Franklin, Wesley, and Robson Street. They're actually city-owned properties. They've been there's a sales agreement that Camargue Properties Inc. has entered into with the City of Nanaimo. Conditions of which include securing a development permit for development on the site. The development permit proposals before council tonight. A very significant, interesting development. Definitely does a good job of approaching the frontages that are offered there on the various street frontages. 53 residential units proposed, along with a commercial retail unit. It's been to design advisory panel with comments from the design advisory panel that have been addressed in the revised package that's in front of council tonight. A couple of variances proposed related to fence height, building height, and small parking related variance. And I'm happy to take any questions on any of that exciting project. Happy to turn it over to the delegation if council has no questions of me. Thank you.
I have a question.
Thank you very much, Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Your Worship, and a question through you to Mr. Holm. So there are 53 residential multifamily units. That's great. My concern is that there are parking spaces for 41. Does that allow, obviously not everyone will necessarily have a car. What about the commercial piece? I'm just worried about, will there be on-street parking for the commercial street users and the staff?
Yeah, through Your Worship to Councillor Perino, in the downtown area, commercial parking is not required for the first 100 parking stalls. On-site parking is not required for the first 100 parking stalls.
Okay.
So it's actually assumed for smaller commercial developments that on-street or other parking options in the way of paid off-street parking would be providing for those uses.
Great project. So glad to see this come to the table. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Not seeing any other questions of Mr. Holm. So the delegation, do they wish to speak to it? Have we got people online? And we have potentially Sarah, and forgive my pronunciation, Sarah Escandary, Brian Gartner, Corbin Christensen from Ace Architecture, Robin Kelly, Sophie Dinux, or Dinux, I'm not sure, and Jeremy Brunel from Group Dinux or Dinux.
Oh, here we go. Okay.
I think we're just getting them online, Your Worship.
Yes. Good evening.
You can hear me. Hello.
Please. The
Can you hear me?
floor is yours. If you could just introduce yourself for the record, though, please.
But you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. I am Brian Gartner, an architect with Ace Architecture. Thank you, and thank you again for this opportunity. We were here in, I believe it was January, we asked or requested council to sell this land to Group Dinux or Carnegie Properties. Robin Kelly, I believe, is here as well. I don't know if he's, Robin, are you? Oh.
Yeah, I'll just answer questions. I figured if there's any.
Okay, I didn't know if you wanted to introduce Carnegie Properties, but I'm sure that happened.
I can briefly. Technically, we're part of the Dinux group. We've been doing stuff in Nanaimo for about 3 decades. Construction. The first multifamily one was Madrona Green in about 2013. Then we've done a few others in a couple of the industrial buildings. The Camargue, that's technically all our family members. We have different names for our company, so that's the one we identify with as a place in southern France where my wife's from that is kind of unique and different. But happy to be here. No, we originally looked at this site, I think, when council had sold it to So Good Properties, and just, I don't want to talk too much about it. It's already been done, but we looked at it back then. But what scared us is we went up there, and I think you remember the injection site down the road. It was a complete tent city with my wife and I, and we were just like, we couldn't really wrap our head around it at the time with what was going on in the corner, but we always really liked the location. And with the choice with Ace Architecture is, It's a lot of the stuff mid-island, including the stuff we do, it's more suburban development form, so that it's a different typology, a bit of a different architectural form, setbacks, everything's, the way it's constructed, everything's a little different. We've been working with ACE on a project in Calgary that's in an urban village with 0 lot line setbacks almost, right on the main street of Bridgeland, and it's an older traditional Italian neighborhood with lots of brick. And we looked at this site and it had a lot of the same characteristics. I mean, different community, a different neighborhood, but like actual constraints and characteristics. So we figured with the experience we'd have with them, it'd be neat to bring in a bit of a different, more urban flavor into it. And Brian's originally from Nanaimo, so he knows the area pretty well. And I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
So just on screen here, I think the last time we presented this, it was more of a massing model, so you can see more materiality. So what you're looking at is the corner of Wesley and Franklin, and there is a stepping or a slope to the site. As you can see, it steps down about 4 meters from Wesley on your left to Robson on your right. So you lose about a story as you progress. And some of those variances you can see in the foreground there on the commercial fronting Wesley is that that wall and the railing. As you can see, the building sort of steps down, and that's the result is those variance requests. Next slide, please. So very, very urban, very great site. You have Wesley's historic frontage, you have Franklin's sort of urban connector through sort of a through street for pedestrians and vehicles, and Robson is a cul-de-sac, but creates a very quiet side to the building that allows for more utilitarian function. And I'll show you a little bit of that later. What you can see on this slide, there was some concern we addressed about the trees on Wesley, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but you can see the size of the canopy on those trees. Next slide, please. Just on the main floor, so the lower floor facing Robson, this is sort of a walkout condition onto Robson, parking a mix of 41 stalls, as Jeremy said, but a mix of small and standard size stalls. And then we have a unit down on that level, and garbage and bike storage in the middle there, and then the lobby is sort of on the bulb in the corner of Franklin and Robson. Next slide, please. This will be the level up, so walking in off of Wesley, you can see on the left, you can see the tree canopies overlaid on that as well as the large radius circles there. And they kind of invade into that commercial unit. It's a small commercial unit, as Jeremy alluded to in the parking question earlier, but we are stepping back as much as we can to still make that work off of Wesley, try to create a slower, more urban character on that Wesley frontage, which we think is a great street. So those trees are proposed to be replanted. The roots and the canopy just were too much in conflict with parking below and what we're trying to do with that commercial corner above. And so we've stepped back about 1.5 meters is the brown sliver you can see there. And then there's between 3 and 5 meters of lighter gray sidewalk there as well. So it'll be a nice corner. It'll allow for a nice commercial frontage there. Other than that, on this level, 14 units, some of the brown going around with the blue that you can see a solar panel array. Those are private sort of patio spaces for those units up above the parkade carport below. Next slide, please. This is moving up the building. So on the left, the commercial, this is the roof of the commercial unit. There was a request to make that a green roof. There really is no views of that. So we spent money meeting design review panels comments in other ways. So just one unit really that looks out over that space. So 14 units on this floor with an amenity space, which is sort of at the knuckle of where the two volumes sort of meet in the middle of the L there. And then it's got the double doors facing down. Next slide, please. The upper level, as we said last time we were at council, we've sort of moved. It's related to the height variance that we've requested. We sort of shoved some of the massing around to the Robson Street interface to create that low-rise character on the Wesley interface. So it just shifted the massing around. So we've got 10 units on the 5th floor facing Robson. You can see those on here. light gray in the middle at that knuckle again is the rooftop amenity the design review panel asked for. And then the gray strip going across is the exiting for the rooftop. So just to try to locate you there. Next slide, please. Some stats. As I said, with the massing, we've met the 2.3 FAR in the land use, so we haven't exceeded, or we're meeting it, no more, no less. 41 stalls, which is more than the land use requirement for this site, and then 53 units. I don't know what else to say there. So next slide, please. This was an image from the previous presentation to council, so we just threw it in so you could see kind of where we went. And so one thing we did, we changed the character of the units facing Wesley Street there, if you can read it in the foreground, and push that rooftop back. There's mechanical and things like that that the commercial unit may or may not need, depending on what tenant goes in there. But we pushed that back. We didn't create rooftop patios on top of the commercial unit. So that's really the major change since this was last presented, but just a little bit more detail. Next slide, please. There's just another view. You can see the amenity space in the middle, and then in the back right corner there, we still have the parkade access, or carport access. You can see the sloping of the site down to Robson becomes 5 stories, 1 story on Wesley, growing to 3, and then 5 on the Robson face. Next slide, please. This section just shows, I think Jeremy's administrative group did a good job of showing in the documentation the height variance, and how it is basically just that floor that I was talking about, sliding the massing around for the 5th floor. But there is, you may ask why 7 meters, but it's really just that mechanical penthouse on the upper level. Some of the sustainable initiatives that we're trying to do with this meeting, Step Code 4, require or may require, we want to make sure we get enough space to put those, to have all the mechanical room that we need for that equipment on that upper level. And so we're allowed a certain amount in the land use, but I think we might exceed it. So we've asked for that extra bit, and it counts towards our height. So just to answer that question. So next slide, please. Just another view, you can see the penthouse sort of stepping back, so really imperceptible from all at-grade conditions on the block face. So just trying to step it back and make it sort of invisible to street views. Next slide, please. Again, the trees that we tried to keep, but you can just see that they were too invasive on the commercial unit, and that would, if we got rid of the commercial unit, we would be creating a large open plaza rather than more commercial character and business opportunity on the Wesley interface and on the corner, Wesley and Franklin. We think it's quite a nice corner and a lot of potential there. You can see some of the trees design review panel asked for, the columnar trees. I'll show you on the landscape plan how challenging it is on this site, that there's just really not a lot of area to work with on planting. So next slide, please. The more utilitarian, you can see the lines on the lower right of the building. That's the carport access. Moving along, you'll have sort of garbage access. The wood is the one unit on that level, and then trying to warm the corner up for the residential entrance on the corner of Franklin and Robson. Next slide, please.
I do hope we're
again,
getting
on
to
the
end of these slides, aren't we?
Sorry?
I do hope we're getting to the end of these slides.
We're almost there.
Yes, Your Worship, we forgot to have you set the 5-minute timer. And
Oh, okay.
You can go to next slide. We've already talked about this. And just another view. We've already looked at this. Next slide, please. The 2 corners, just Wesley and Franklin and Robson. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Not very much planting, as I said. There's the landscape plan. Next slide, please. And the materials design review panel asked for some full bed brick that'll create a nice, that'll age well. The gray brick should age well in an urban environment, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the delegation? Councillor Hemmons, Gesselbrock, and Eastmere in order I have so far. Councillor Hemmons moves the recommended motion. Councillor Prino seconds. Do you want to ask some questions of the delegation, however, anyone? Councillor Gesselbrock, Councillor Eastmere? Just, sorry, we're getting to, there you go.
I was going to thank the delegation for the very thorough presentation, and I think this is going to be a very welcomed development in the downtown, so thank you for the work on that, and looking forward to seeing it built.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Eastmere, please.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. So just going back to the 2 trees that are being removed along Wesley Street, is there, the plan does include replacing those with trees in that area that will have some type of canopy?
We actually spoke with the city on this, and we can't on our diagrams improve necessarily put in street trees like off-site design works, because that's the city for engineering to do. But in negotiations with them, that was always a plan, is trying to really enhance a corner. And part of the issue with the trees, they were actually planted in the 90s. They're not as historical. If you go next time when you're going by there, you'll see normally they're between the sidewalk and the road. They're right at the property line. They're actually, the roots are bowing over the retaining wall that the city already has. So the arborist wasn't even sure that they're going to survive. So we definitely do want to help with that corner, and our goal is to replant new trees just in a way that they'll survive.
Okay, I think I heard a yes there.
Yeah, it was a long conversation.
Okay, yeah, and it was a long conversation at the design advisory panel as well. And there's, yeah, a lot of love for those 2 trees, but totally understand just because of the placement of them, and they're already sort of starting to lean. So there's, yeah, a lot of love for the big mature trees along Wesley Street, but I think given how great the plan looks and the fact that we seem to have a plan to replace them, and you've got a lot of other columnar trees along there, it's going to be a really nice project. And just big thanks to the design advisory panel for their work on this. Some of the changes, like the move to the full bed brick, I think is going to look really good. You also changed the fact that some of the first floor units did have balconies going down, or stairs going down to Franklin Street, and I think that's a really smart change that you made there. So yeah, credit to the design panel and to your team for the result that we see here. I think it's going to be a really nice addition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, motion carries. Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation, folks. The next is D, rezoning application number RA 487-5300 Tanya Drive. Councillor Thorpe.
Yes, Your Worship, if I may, I need to recuse myself from this as I have a relative involved with the project.
Very good, thank you. Give Councillor Thorpe a moment to recuse himself. Mr. Holm, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. This rezoning application is for property in the Lost Lake neighborhood, outlined in red on the screen there, and fronting on Tanya Drive. The properties are designated suburban neighborhood in city plan, the official community plan, as well as being designated in a special service area, and I'll speak to that a little bit here in a minute. It's a 4-hectare site, so quite a large property. In a steep slope development permit area as well, quite a topographically challenged site, steeply sloping lands, and through city plan, the designation of the special service area was put in place for a number of properties in that area to address some servicing constraints related to the elevation of the properties and some of the grade challenges there, and I'll speak to that a little bit. What's proposed here is a rezoning from AR2 which is an urban reserve zone, to R10 with a site-specific density. R10 is the city's steep slope residential zone. R10 with a site-specific density of 24 units per hectare. A concept plan was developed showing, there we go, thank you, showing a number of 20 buildings, I believe, 4 units each in concept. Again, this is rezoning stage, so conceptual development of the land, as well as you can see preservation of significant wetlands on the site. And some of the challenges with regard to the special service area include the need to address road networking, sanitary sewer service, rainwater management, and in this case, specifically the water service is a bit of a challenge there. There's a need for a pump to service lands above the 185-meter contour in that area, and we've worked with the development group, the applicant, to come up with a plan to do that, as well as to secure, as City Plan directs, the mechanisms to address the increased costs related to servicing those lands at higher elevations with increased water infrastructure. As I mentioned, significant wetlands would be protected through future development permit area detailed review, through development permit application if the rezoning is successful. There is a development permit for protection of environmentally sensitive features that applies in that area. Would apply to the property. Recommended to be secured through the rezoning application, a community amenity contribution, conceptually based on the conceptual plans in the range of $171,000. Request is direct 50% of that to Parks Trails improvements and 50% to the city's Housing Legacy Reserve Fund, as well as secured through rezoning recommended road dedication, off-site works, operations and maintenance commitments related to the water infrastructure, and hydrogeologic study related to, at development permit stage, related to rainwater management on the site. I'm happy to take questions, but it does, the concept aligns with city plan policy for the property. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holm. I'm not seeing any questions. Councillor Hemmons? Sorry, Councillor Eastmere.
Thank you. I noted in the report under the community consultation, it notes that staff recognized the capacity of Lost Lake Road to accommodate additional vehicle traffic, but there are known issues with vehicle speeds and sight lines at certain intersections, and traffic calming was implemented along Lost Lake Road in 2021, and then there was another phase of traffic calming that was sort of planned and got put on hold. I'm wondering if we can proactively put that back into the plan, noting the increased density that's now happening along here.
Your Worship, I think one of the things with the second stage of traffic calming was anytime you do traffic calming, there's an intense incubation period with the residents, and so we worked pretty closely with the residents to try and ease them into the changes, similar to what we're seeing right now on Extension Road. So once the first phase of traffic calming on Lost Lake was completed, we had quite a bit of input and feedback from the residents that was it. That's all they wanted to see. They didn't want further works. However, with the additional traffic from here, I can't speak to the specifics, whether that's been looked at in a broader picture, but it's something that we'll need to revisit. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, through the chair, I'll just note that I know that the Lost Lake Neighborhood Association, that is one of their priorities that we heard through the neighborhood group consultation annual meeting that we had with them, and so I know that's on the list to look at, so I'll be really interested to see that move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hemmons? No, we'll go to Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Worship. And a question through you to Mr. Holmes. I'm just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the actual dwelling units that will be proposed for the property. Just, I've had some questions answered myself, and I just wanted to have you confirm a little bit more about them.
Sure, through your worship to Councillor Perino. So this is obviously conceptual at rezoning stage. The intent of what's presented in concept is to provide ground-oriented multi-family units. These are clustered in units of 4 as shown, in line with the suburban neighborhood policy. And so they would be generally family-oriented, ground-oriented units, and as proposed here in clusters of 4 in each building. So.
Okay. And the wetlands will be protected?
Yes, there are bylaw provisions in place, both through the zoning bylaw and through the city plan, the development permit area guideline requirements related to protection of environmentally sensitive features.
This is within walking distance of a school. Nice project.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2024 number 4500.230 to rezone 5300 Tanya Drive from urban reserve AR2 to steep slope residential R10 with site-specific density pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Perino. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2024 number 4500.230 pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Perino. Any discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries.
I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2024 number 4500.230 pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Perino. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Councillor Hemmons, once more.
Thank you. I move that council direct staff to secure the conditions related to zoning amendment bylaw 2024 number 4500.230 as outlined in the conditions of rezoning section of the staff report titled rezoning application number RA487 5300 Tanya Drive dated 2024 July 22nd prior to final adoption.
Seconded, Councillor Perino. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Council, I am somewhat in your hands. We're due for a break shortly. I'm considerate of staff here. We do have a delegation with the next addendum item, and Ms. Gurry will wisely control me this time and remind me that they have a 5-minute limit, but I'm in your hands, Council. You wish to take the break now? Carry on. All right, we'll do the next one, and then I want to take a break for purposes of staff, if that's all right. Oh, yes, and get Councillor Thorpe back in here. Councillor, you're not coming up, Councillor Manley, but I'll...
Not coming up? Oh,
there we go.
Yeah, Your Worship, I just want to note that in the past, I had recused myself from discussions surrounding the Nanaimo Association for Community Living. In 2022, I had a very small contract with them to negotiate the purchase of a farm. The Klein farm didn't happen. I haven't had any work with them since, and that was the only job I've ever done with them. And so I do not feel the need to recuse myself from this discussion.
Wisely stated for the record, and if I were the Pope, I would give you absolution, so we're all good.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for saying that. The next is rezoning application number RA501-3425 Uplands Drive. Mr. Holm, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll be really brief, recognizing the time and the fact that we have a delegation prepared to speak to this. So this is an application from Low Hammond Rowe Architects on behalf of the Nanaimo Association for Community Living for property outlined on the screen in red on Uplands Drive. It's neighborhood designated in city plan. The proposed rezoning is from R6 and R10 to R8. This is a 1 hectare site. We have existing development of 28 non-market housing units on the property. The concept with the rezoning proposes an additional 48 non-market units. To be secured through rezoning would be community amenity contribution, and active transportation network improvements to support active transportation networking in the area. You can see the concept elevations for the buildings there. Happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do have a delegation. We have, hoping I pronounce it correctly, Tinny Lally in person. Yep. And is Jackson Lowe coming in via Zoom tonight? I think yes. We can see him, Mr. Lowe, and Selena Kwok as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I believe, Your Worship, they're just here to answer any questions. So I don't think you need to set a timer unless there's something.
Oh, I'm going to set the timer anyway this time. Once bitten, twice shy. So, Lally, anything you wish to add in addition to what's available to council and the public?
I'm really here to just to thank all of you for considering this project. I'd like to say the staff has been great to work with on this project, moving it forward. It is a project that we submitted to BC Housing in the past, and one of the main concerns was we weren't far enough advanced in our design process for it to be considered, and they have asked us to see if we could get this to the next level of rezoning and try to be more successful in the next proposal call, which is scheduled for early 2025. It sounds like it's a bit of ways, but from our perspective, it's tomorrow. So hopefully there's no delays, and I do appreciate all the work that everybody on staff has done for us.
Thank you very much, and if I may respond before I ask if there's any questions, I think most of us have had an opportunity at various times to be on the site, and what goes on there and the accommodation it provides for people is a pretty wonderful thing for our community. So, any questions for the delegation? Not seeing any. Thank you very much.
Okay.
You can relax. Councillor Hemmons is the one who's got all the verbiage here.
Thank you, Your Worship. I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2024 number 4500.228 to rezone a portion of 3425 Uplands Drive from steep slope residential R10 and low density residential R6 to medium density residential R8 with a site specific personal care facility use pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2024 number 4500.228 pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Perino. Any discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries.
I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2024 number 4500.228 pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries.
And finally, I move that council direct staff to secure the conditions related to zoning amendment bylaw 2024 number 4500.228 as outlined in the conditions of rezoning section of the staff report titled rezoning application number RA501-3425 Uplands Drive dated July 22nd, 2024 prior to final adoption.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. All right, we'll take the evening break now. We'll reconvene at 9:15, please, everyone.
Please do not throw material down the catch basins.
That swoop low and then rise, gliding over cushions of air, like the gentle crest and trough of ocean waves, to fan out in oblivion. All is quiet.
Please, again, thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Council will recall very recently adopting amendments to the zoning bylaw to address provincial regulatory changes, legislative changes related to small-scale multi-unit housing. So that affected, I'm trying to recall the number, I'm going to say 23,500 properties in the city. In any event, a significant number, significant rezoning of properties within the city to support small-scale multi-unit housing as required by the province. In that, in amongst the changes there, we introduced interim corridor zoning to properties that are in corridor areas that we'd like to see densified beyond the small-scale multi-unit housing. What we did identify, staff have identified and working with developers and property owners on is that there's need for an amendment, correction here to recognize in interim corridor zoned areas where existing single-family dwellings exist, the appropriate zoning bylaw regulations that should apply are the same as should apply in the case of the R1, the single residential zone. So there's an amendment proposed here that would ensure that properties that are zoned interim corridor that are occupied by single residential dwellings have regulations that would apply to those that would be similar to single residential dwellings in the R1 zone. And hopefully that makes sense. So this is really to correct a small error in a significant bylaw amendment that Council recently approved to address provincial legislative changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holm. I'm not seeing any questions for you. Councillor Hemmens, please.
Thank you, Worship. I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2024 number 4500.229 update to interim corridor area pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Perino. All those in favor? Any opposed? None?
I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2024 number 4500.229 pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Perino. Any discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? None? Motion carries.
I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2024 number 4500.229 pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Any opposed? None? Motion carries. Thank you. And finally, G, Development Approval Process Review. Mr. Holm, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is an item familiar to Council, as it was received by Governance and Priorities Committee on March 25th, receiving support from the committee at that time with, sorry, I should clarify what it is. So this is a development approval process review that was undertaken by Nielsen Strategies to support to provide recommendations with regard to improvements to the effectiveness and efficiency of development approval processes in the city. Again, as I mentioned, it was received, a draft report was received by Governance and Priorities Committee on March 25th. At that time, in April, Council directed staff to finalize the report with the consultant. What's presented here are the final report and recommendations. There were no significant changes to the recommendations, so effectively the same recommendations as provided to GPC in March. Some improvements to improve brevity and clarity in the recommendations, and some additional minor adjustments to the report content. But this project involved significant consultation with the development industry and provides recommendations in 13 categories that will, if enacted at the advice of the consultant, improve process efficiency and effectiveness, and reduce barriers and improve timelines for development. Happy to take questions on that, and yeah, pleased to see this before Council for consideration of endorsement. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We have questions from, in order, Councillors Hemmens and then Perino, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to staff, I apologize, we probably went over this in March, but can you just confirm for me that we have a monitoring plan in place to ensure that the recommendations are being followed?
Yes, through Your Worship to Councillor Hemmens, yes, we will be monitoring and implementing the recommendations. We've actually, some of them I could pull out have already been implemented since the report was in draft. Some were in the process of being implemented, and yeah, we will be working with. In fact, one of the recommendations is to form a liaison group with the development industry, which would aid in monitoring and advising, monitoring the implementation and advising on further recommendations as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Worship, and a question through you to Mr. Holmes. Under number 4, target timeline recommendations, it says that the city defer the setting of targets until the new file software management platform is in place, and other recommended changes in this report have been actioned. I'm just wondering when the actual software management program will be in place.
Thank you. Through Your Worship. Yeah, well, it's a phased implementation of the software. We're looking at, we're approaching the commercial complex building permit applications, development applications first. Yes. And we're anticipating early part of 2025 we should have software updated to do that. Unfortunately, yeah, some of we're going to have later phases that will take a little bit longer to implement. But one of the things with target timelines, obviously, is just being able to access the data. There's a transparency issue with respect to. There's also a consistency issue with respect to sort of what you're measuring from when to when, and who's the file with at that point. So right now we're not able to track when time is with the applicant very consistently. We're not able to monitor with sort of granularity and transparency for process improvements, and that's what this is trying to get at. Is with the software improvements, we'll have better granularity and transparency into where a file is at in process and where the holdups are.
Okay. And one other question, if I might. On number 9, role of engineering recommendations. I just wondered if you could just, the language is not in so much lay terms, and I'm just wondering if you could tell me, does that mean that if a developing company brings their own engineers, does that mean that we use their engineers, or do we still have to use our own, or can you just explain it for me?
Yeah, sure, through your worship, to Councillor Perino's question. So the reference to development engineering is, so within the planning and development section, which I look after.
Yes.
So there is a development engineering section. So that group reviews development-related civil works.
Yes.
And then under Mr. Sims' group, we have sort of the broader engineering function that looks after the city's infrastructure and planning for improvements and maintenance and operations of the city's infrastructure, and setting the standards that the civil works are designed to. Hopefully that's making more sense.
Well, it doesn't actually explain. So when they bring their own engineers, do we take advantage of them? I'm sorry, when I'm saying take advantage, sorry, I don't mean to not taking advantage of, but do we take advantage of their expertise in the development?
Thanks for the clarity. Absolutely. So the standards are set. The engineering standards that we require the developers' engineers to design to are established by Mr. Sims' group, ultimately adopted by council, the Manual of Engineering Standards and Specifications, and then developers will design to those standards. They'll have their engineers design to those standards, and then those designs will be reviewed by the development engineering review group that's in my area.
Okay.
That's Mr. Musso and his team. So we definitely get we set the design standards, and the developer's engineer is involved in developing the design to meet the standards. There's often when there's a real world translation to the standards and the context, and it's there's definitely room for engineering professional opinion in the design, and when it meets the real world, and that's reviewed in concert with the development engineering review group in my area, as well as Mr. Sims' staff. I hope that helps.
Very pleased to see this, and hope it does help the process move along faster. Thank you.
Councillor Perino, do you care to make the recommended motion then?
Please.
Oh, pardon me, Councillor Gesselbrock, sorry.
If you can make the motion, I'll second it.
Councillor Perino has made the motion, Councillor Gesselbrock has seconded. Any questions?
Just
Councillor
speak to it. No, I appreciate the report. I think a lot of the recommendations made address, over the 5-6 years that I've been on council, a lot of the complaints and constructive feedback about the permitting process. And so, putting energy to address these things would be great. And I'm just curious in terms of, Councillor Hemmons touched on it, but just updating council on how the implementation of the recommendations are going. Is that something that you'd come to council, every 6 months or so, just to give us an update? Because I'd definitely be curious, just sort of see how the implementation is going and where we're at in terms of enacting the recommendations.
Yeah, of course, that's we're happy to do that. we do an annual development activity review, and we're happy to report on progress at that point. If that's council's desire, we're happy to do that. Thanks.
That'd be great, and thanks for all the work put into this.
No further questions. Motion's on the floor. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you very much. We're on to 13 bylaws. The first one, zoning amendment bylaw 2023, number 4500.212. Councillor Hemmons, please.
Thank you. I move that zoning amendment bylaw 2023 number 4500.212 to rezone 1044 and 1048 Old Victoria Road from single dwelling residential R1 to high-tech industrial I3 be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. The next is 13B, highway closure and dedication removal bylaw 2024, number 7372. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. I move that highway closure and dedication removal bylaw 2024 number 7372 to provide for highway closure and dedication removal of a portion of Bryden Street adjacent to 266 and 268 Bryden Street be adopted.
Seconded, Councillor Perino. All those in favor? Any opposed? None. Motion carries. We have no correspondence. Councillor Thorpe is giving us notice of motion. And that'll be brought forward at the next council meeting, Ms. Gurry. Thank you. And on to other business, 16B, Councillor Hemmons, re-amendment to Union of BC Municipalities resolution regarding public libraries. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to Council for supporting this resolution at AVICC that is going forward to UBCM. We co-submitted this as City of Nanaimo, I want to say village, might be Town of Oak Bay, I'm so sorry, Cathette Regional District and the City of Powell River. The four of us who submitted this, through some research, have identified what we believe to be a much better enactment clause that actually draws upon a clause within the Library Act that allows the minister to create an advisory body. So we're switching the enactment clause to be more action-oriented, and we think we'll get the attention of the ministry. So I'd like your support. Thank you. I'd like to move the amendment.
Seconded, Councillor Eastmere. Any discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you. B's been removed. Question period, Ms. Gurry, please. The first is Jim Smith, 12B. Mr. Smith, please.
Thank you. Jim Smith, Scenic Place, Nanaimo. Let me preface my question. I recently was privy to some historical data with respect to property tax increases versus various Nanaimo councils. And according to the data that I saw, this council has been one of the most egregious in terms of property tax hikes that have been imposed upon the citizens. During Ms. Mercer's presentation on the works yard, there were some numbers presented for 2025, 26, 27, 28 that appeared to be 7+ for 25, 26, 4 point something for 27, 2 point something for 28. Now these numbers don't include some of the other projects that you still have in the queue, such as the South End Community Center. And it's my understanding that the hospital's looking for significant increases in taxation as well. So by those numbers alone, you are on track to increase property taxes by well over 20% within over a 4-year period. My question is, what council would the Nanaimo City Council give to the citizens of Nanaimo to assist them in dealing with this property tax increase trajectory that is being imposed upon them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Council doesn't give money per se, although we do have a grants program to various organizations. But what Council does is deliver the services that the citizens of Nanaimo require, including capital projects. I appreciate your comments about, you described it as egregious, I think, or tax increases, but depending on the stuff you're looking at, I often find that we have a very able staff member, Jamie Slater, who can respond to specific questions around tax increases generally in comparison to other municipalities. And I would suggest, if you want to drop me an email, I'll get her to respond to whatever source of information you have that might assist you in understanding why I think that statement, with great respect, is somewhat unfair. If other members of council wish to respond to your question, more than welcome to do so. But those are, like all figures when it comes to these projects, they are estimates, potentially based on budgetary commitments and long-range financial planning, but they don't always turn out to be the case.
I don't think you really answered my question. Maybe a better way to frame it is, how do you realistically expect the citizens of this community to sustain that kind of trajectory with regard to property taxation?
Whether or not that is in fact the trajectory remains to be seen as each year council votes on its budget. So with respect, I understand what you're saying, but those figures are not written in stone. Those are projections that assist council in coming to its decisions around the things that were placed before us tonight. The next is Jeff Annesley, 12B.
Your Worship?
Councillor Manley, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to that. I mean, we've had, I came on to council and I started to read master plans and reports, including from the fire departments. And, you know, many councils previous to this council and the previous council chose not to increase taxes. And there's a price to pay for that. And one of those prices was for our fire department. So we had to hire a lot of firefighters for this community. This community has gone through extensive growth. I've lived in this region my whole life. I'm third generation here. And we've seen significant growth in this region. And when you read the fire department master plan, you see that there was a huge need to hire firefighters in this community and to add equipment. And that had a significant hit on taxes. To ignore those kind of reports is irresponsible. We had fires set along the parkway last year, 9 fires set along the parkway. One of those fires gets into our community in this hot, dry weather and burns the community. You'd see serious problems. And just ask the good folks of West Kelowna about how fast a fire moves through a community. So we see these reports and we have to do our due diligence, and to ignore those reports would be irresponsible. And by complying with, you know, and moving forward on the recommendations that staff provide to us, we're doing what is the right thing to do for the community. If we did not do that, and we had incidents where the community burned and then citizens looked back at those reports and asked us why we ignored those reports, I think we would have a serious problem on our hands. So that's why you're seeing some tax increases. You cannot continue to just kick the can down the road and not build the projects and deal with the infrastructure in a community that continues to grow. And we're going to see 50,000 more people moving to the Nanaimo area. That's what the reports say, according to the growth trajectory, that we're going to see 50,000 more people here by 2042. So we need to plan for that growth, we need to manage that growth, and we need to make sure that we have services in place for that growth.
Thank you very much. Mr. Annesley, please. Good evening.
When Mr. Rosen presented to you guys at the governance and priorities meetings in June, he explained that there would be construction beyond the 90 million. And I think Councillor Perino, you talked to him about that tonight again. And I'm wondering, is that extra construction like, how are we going to, what's going to be paying for that? 'Cause I think when people see that, they're going to see 90 million one and done, but they're not understanding that there is going to be further costs associated with building whatever infrastructure is going to be attached to this. And I'm just wondering, and then you asked a question, which was good, is how would we pay for that beyond the 90 million? I understand what you're trying to do with the 90 million, and that's good, but there are going to be costs beyond the 90 million, beyond the one and done. And I think it's really important that the citizens know that. And how is that going to be paid for? Is it necessary infrastructure to the NOC and the Public Works Yard? And how is that breakdown going to happen?
Mr. Sims, please.
Your Worship, thanks. I can answer that. Essentially, the work beyond the 90 million, the so-called one and done, will be folded into the regular capital planning process. But the nice part about it, if I can say it that way, is that the projects or the work that needs to be done is smaller in scale. So it'd be a renovation, for instance, of a workshop. So that's can be done and folded into the longer range plan, capital plan, much easier, rather than these big bite-sized pieces of structure that have to be done. So we expect that rather than the entire project costing 163 million, we'll save significantly, not only in the borrowing costs, but also in the fact that we're downscaling some of the work that's needed to be done.
So would that be paid through reserves or taxation, or how would that, sorry?
Ms. Mercer.
Through your worship, about 85% of our capital plan is funded from reserves.
Okay.
So in all likelihood, those projects will be funded through reserves.
Okay, good. And I'm just sorry, another quick question, because it was the first time I heard it. And when Mr. Clark did his delegation, and thank you for asking him a question, Councilor Gieselbrecht, but you talked about a mail-out, and we'd never heard that before. And I just wondered if you could illuminate that when you were talking about, I had heard about the submitting online, but I had not heard anything about a mail-out or anything. So just if you could illuminate that a little bit more.
Absolutely. So in the discussion around the AAP policy, it was raised just around communication and engagement with the public and awareness around the different projects, as that was something that was brought up by the community. And so each AAP project can be of different scales, and the larger capital builds, but there's sometimes, converting a small park so that, can allow for development to happen. And so we passed in our policy a communications plan policy, which basically says that when an AAP is brought to council to make a decision on whether to go out, we'll have to have a discussion on how we plan to communicate that AAP engagement out to the community and have to have a plan for it. And so one of the items that was discussed was that for these larger plans, it may be appropriate to have a mail out to everyone, every property, with information that details the project that's happening and the budget and the cost of it, and also instructions and awareness around the AAP process. And so every time we go for AAP, we'll be having that discussion, and council will choose to what degree of communication to the community we're going to take. It could be small, it could be large, depending on the scale of the project and what the council feels is appropriate.
Okay, so you're still in discussion with that then? Because just when I heard it was an affirmative, and just other meetings I've been to, I'd heard that you guys, the cost structure of it or just the timing of it was not for this particular project. But and what you're saying also is that this would be a pamphlet as opposed to being the actual form?
Yeah, so there was discussion about should we just mail out the form, or should we, or is it more appropriate for information before the AAP starts? And there's issues around timing and that, and mailing out the form is just not appropriate. It can create legal problems. It doesn't work. But there was discussion during that session about doing a mail out potentially, a month before or whatever is figured to be a good idea to get the word out. Okay. And so it's going to depend on each thing. So the next.
It's not 100% confirmed. I just want to make sure. I don't know. I just
Yeah, so it's
that you're actually
there's a
for this one. We are going to get some kind of documentation.
there's a policy to establish a communication plan. So when this bylaw comes forward to discuss whether we're going to go ahead with it, council will have a discussion on what is going to be the communication strategy. And so I can't guarantee that there'll be a mail out, but I think from
what you guys are leaning towards that then maybe, or because I
can't.
Gentlemen, one at a time, please.
I'm not going to speculate, but I can say from the feedback from the community, you know, we had a discussion on that, and that's probably one of the best ideas, you know, that was brought forward. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Your Worship. We do send out a newsletter. I think it's biannually that we send out, and so we're going to know about some AAPs well in advance, like a large one like this, and so it would be something we would consider including in a newsletter that would go out to every household. I don't think we're planning on doing a special newsletter or a special mail out, but it would be included in what you already received from the city.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you. And a third and final one is Jen Catkins, reboring dollars. And if you could please relate it to an agenda item, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Hi. I don't know about which agenda item. It's when you were talking about the AAP process. I wrote just thoughts and with questions, so if I could just read that and then you'll kind of hear what I was thinking while you guys were all talking about all these options about the AAP, and maybe I heard wrong, or someone could clarify. So one of the first things that I kind of wrote down was there was sort of two worries. Was I heard someone say painting future council with the burden of this. It was about the AAP, and I don't know what the painting of future council. And then there was discussion around the interest rates and what'll it be in 5 years' time, and maybe we shouldn't borrow from within the budgets because in case someone mentioned Calgary had unexpected expenses, so we should be concerned, which is but then I think, well, what about the painting of the residents with the burden of this AAP? Just you're showing concern of painting the future council, but what about us that have to pay for it? We're going to be concerned. People have mortgages. The interest rates will come up in 5 years' time. We're going to be pained with what do we do? Sell? We were expecting 50,000 more people with all the there was the discussion about the hospital needs to be redone, and the new police station, new fire. If it's going to
there is a question coming,
explosion, yeah. Well, why is it everyone? I heard option number 4. Let's go for option number 4. That don't pull it within the budget. Don't paint future council. So I think option number 4 was put it on the citizens. The taxing the citizens was what I was hearing everybody say.
And the question is.
My concerns. So, just the putting it all on the residents. That was the sort of the final decision, was not to worry about it. Just put it to the residents. Mm-hmm. And I've heard before that there's tax exemptions or hotels that don't pay taxes, and people that maybe, and developments that had come in and said they get a tax break for so many years. Maybe all those things need to be adjusted to say, maybe you have to change that. And I heard them mention there's billions of dollars in assets.
Ms. Catkins, please, give us a question. I appreciate your concerns. If you want to have a general discussion with some members of council or send us a long email, more than welcome.
I'll answer.
There's got to be a question. This is question period. Councillor Perino, though I think
I think I get it. I think I get it. Yes, I think so. The one thing that's important for us to explain to everyone is that whether you get something passed through an AAP or you get something passed through a referendum, it still has to be paid by the public, right? Every taxpayer has to pay it. So it's important that whether it's AAP, it's just the same as referendum, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, if it passes, it's a tax that you have to pay. So that's number one. The worry about those other options that you heard about is that when we draw from reserves, then you have, if you have an emergency like what Calgary did, or like what we did when we had the water main break right on Bowen, then you might not have enough money to be able to pay for those things, and those are extras. So we're very hesitant to take money out of reserves to pay those bills. We feel that if we could draw it out, the loan, over 20 years, and yes, sometimes the interest rates may change, and the city will grow, so we think that that would be the least expensive option, because we can't do without a public works yard, right? They're the people that pick up your garbage and take away your snow and, you know, take care of the sanitation and the water and everything else. We can't live without that. So we know we have to do this, and that's why we're trying to figure out what's the least expensive way for our taxpayers to take that burden on over 20 years. That's why we're in that direction. But I don't want you to ever think that whether it's AAP or referendum, it's the same at the end of the day if it passes. So I hope that helps to bring it on. And you're right, the expenses are incredible. Councillor Manley talked about it. It's, you know, they'd gone years without putting enough money aside for these emergencies. And the eventual, you know, we've got a 63-year-old hospital. We have a 60-year-old public works yard. I mean, the city was, what, 30,000 people when it was first built? It's ridiculous. Suddenly you've got an explosion of the public and you don't have the infrastructure to be able to handle it. And that's where the expense comes from, because we realize at this table we have to take care of infrastructure first. That's our first priority. So
I'm concerned, like, if Texas, it's, you know, all these other projects that are going to go skyrocketing, and you're hoping for 50,000 more people, or, you know.
Yes.
And maybe the word's going to get out, and people are going to do a hard left and go, avoid Nanaimo because it has the worst taxes. Like, you know, it's a huge burden, because people have mortgages, and they're going to worry, where am I going to draw from?
That's right.
You know, and pay for that.
It's a very fair statement. It's very fair.
And the other thing I was they were mentioning, when it mentioned the options of trying to, like, pull the most important things out of the NOC, was this number 2 was administration, if I remember.
Well,
that
the
right?
two buildings, so there's the Public Works building and the administration. You know, Mr. Ainsley was talking about it when he got up to speak, but part of the reason why we voted to do the $90 million project versus the $48 million was because it takes care of the whole thing. Do you remember the discussion about 160 million?
160.
Well, the 90 million, the 90 million will take care of the bulk of that. And we can take care of those other projects with some of the reserve dollars that we have. So that whole thing, the 4 phases, now becomes the one. And we knew that it's a far better use of the money to go the 90 million. That's why we voted for it.
My concern was.
I appreciate this concern. This is not a dialogue. If you have a question, ask the question, and if you and Councillor Prino wish to have a dialogue
we can talk later.
We'll let the rest of council and staff go home, please.
But
is there a question?
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, like, why would administration be part of, like, the second priority for the NOC when the whole discussion in the past was to change the oils in the trucks? That was the bumpers don't fit, so we need to, that was the biggest priority. I never heard it mentioned.
I think I have your question, and I'm going to answer it.
Administrative people.
Have you been to the work site itself? Have you seen the offices where staff have been working out of ATCO trailers for how many decades now?
But it just never was mentioned during his, when he talked about, he had 20 minutes where he discussed why they want this. I never heard them say, we really got to get 170 people upstairs.
Mr. Sims, please.
Your Worship, I don't want to editorialize too much, but, you know, the entire master plan was built around the fleet maintenance facility as being the highest priority, but an equally urgent priority was the admin building. When we decided to parse it up into 4 stages, the fleet maintenance facility, due to its seismic vulnerability, floated to the top. It didn't diminish the priority of the other. Our previous discussions, Councillor Hemmons mentioned this, our previous discussions were focused purely on the fleet maintenance building because that's what was in front of us. We'd broken it out into phases. When council asked staff to go back and look at the plan and reconsider it, we brought that option back, that was the next highest priority. And Your Worship, if I can perhaps editorialize, and I know I beg your forgiveness on this one, but often we have these discussions about the cost of tax increases, and it's all about the percent increase. It's never about the cost of services. And, you know, we can have the discussion one day, maybe the community should have the discussion about which services could they do without. Would you like to do without your parks? Would you like to do without your garbage? All of those sorts of questions. And we've never heard anyone say, we should cut some services here and there and everywhere so that we can keep taxes the same. These are simply the cost of providing taxes. And I apologize for editorializing, but it's really about, we're fixated on this number and percent increase, but that's kind of a meaningless number, quite frankly. Apologies, Your Worship.
Well, I'm not against services. I'm just was concerned why all of a sudden it was the admin. That's not a service.
With respect, it was discussed. It was part of the initial discussions around the project that would be phased over. The priority was the service base, if you will, but the administration building was all part of the project. So I appreciate you may have missed it, but it wasn't discussed. Do you have any other questions?
No, I'll have to go back and listen to his. That was like a 20-minute, and I heard that can't change the oil properly. Yeah, I didn't hear that admin people was.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. Motion for adjournment moved Councillor Eastmere, seconded Councillor Gesselbrock. All those in favor, any opposed? Thank you very much. Appreciation to staff. It's been a long day.